So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we're going back to an old classic, from a brand new map to an old classic. We have the first variant of the mountain pass, so obviously there's going to be a lot of pathways that both sides can take, and it is going to be not so much a siege, but definitely attack defense orientated, because it's going to be a 3 versus 4. And it's also worth saying as well that I think there are quite a few newer players in this lobby as well, so I'm not going to be quite so harsh, I should say, on like the tactics that people use here, because obviously when it's newer players, you know, obviously you've got to learn, you've got to start somewhere. So I'll be interested to see how a newer player might approach a battle like this, because obviously in most Total Wars, especially the modern Total Wars, if you just play campaign, generally the maps are very simplistic, I would say. You know, obviously mostly open fields, and even the sieges are very formulaic, whereas on a map like this, of course, there's a lot of dynamic elements to it, which means the battle can work out in very different ways, depending on how you play it. So we'll see how well this goes. And we'll start off with the red team, seeing as they are technically the de facto attackers, starting off with probably the player who has played the game the most in this entire game, well, in this particular lobby, I would suggest. We have Froggy playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm. Obviously Khazad-dûm, certainly one of the strongest infantry factions in the game, as you would expect. We have some 4th Legion Shield Guard here making up his front line, but obviously he has quite a long way to march before he gets into his position to help his allies, because obviously this deployment zone means he can only really deploy down here. He's got a couple of units of Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, of course. The main thing they have over Erebor, well, the only thing they have over Erebor really in a range capacity at the moment, is the fact that they can go, you know, they can attack at much further ranges, because they have archers. The Iron Watch of Miramir don't really fulfill their intended purpose at the moment, but when the hotfix comes out, hopefully they will. But for the time being, certainly the long range element is the only thing Khazad-dûm can count having over Erebor in a range capacity. But of course, the main thing about Khazad-dûm, the main draw is playing of them as them over Erebor, is the fact that they have stronger infantry, of course, the main aspect to any good Dwarven army, and the 3rd Legion infantry here, even without their armour upgrade, are still a fantastic unit of line infantry to base your army around. And the warriors of Khazad-dûm are even better than most factions' standard line infantry, and this is considered the cheaper option for the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, so a lot of good infantry here, and on the attack that should be very, very useful indeed. And then at the back, the elite units, of course, 2 units of Sons of the Fallen flanking the 3 elite units of Khazad-dûm. A very popular thing to do in the last patch, of course, was to bring all of the elite units of Dwarven infantry. You can still do that, but I'd say it's probably less effective than it was, because obviously you do sacrifice a lot of numbers in order to do that. But we'll see if it pans out here. So Legion Bodyguard, the Armour-Piercing Mithril Guard, the Inspiring Legion Bodyguard, I should say, and then obviously the 3 hit point guards of Khazad-dûm with Balin in that unit. So very, very strong all around. Very robust army indeed, and he will be marching down the mountain pass to try and quickly reinforce Kanzo, who is a newer player, I believe, who's going to be playing as the realm of Mirkwood. Mirkwood here are in a rather interesting position right in the valley. They're going to need to be careful. Obviously, charging into the enemy formations will probably end up with them dying, because even with their armour upgrades, as you can see here, they are still going to be up against it if they charge into all those archers. Hiri Lang, the heavy swordsman that the elves can bring, that's 4 units of them, so probably going into the red limit there, which is definitely the sign of a newer player. That's 5 units of Hiri Lang, actually, so yeah. A veteran player would never do this, because this is certainly not worth it in any capacity. So we'll see if that does anything for him. Some Ents. And then back here, we have a unit of Elven King's Palace Guard with the armour upgrade as well. There's obviously going to be some hidden units here, because even going into the red limit as harshly as he's done would not result, I think, in an army this small. So there's probably a few hidden units around here as well, but honestly this is going to be the main bulk of his army, and it's very, very small, so yeah, obviously it's only a mistake that a newer player would make, but still he can still do something for his team here if he is wise with what units he has brought. We have Merciful X, who's another player I don't recognise, who's playing as Cardland. He has got a much more substantial army, I must say. Mercenary Guildsmen with their maces on the front line, armour piercing, of course, the Minhiriath Spearmen, who themselves actually have a very minor bonus against armoured units, but for the most part they are just standard human spearmen. We've got some Greenway Garrison footmen, of course, Cardland, able to bring a lot of pikes indeed, including the Wardens of Tir Gorthad to help with their morale issues. Some Half-Guard of Amon Sul, who are the best thing to help with Cardland's morale issues, to be honest, because their morale buff is pretty strong, and it's in a very wide area as well. Some Dunedain Captains, obviously the Cardland Crossbows, the Minhiriath Sharpshooters, very good bring. Mercenary Guildsmen, more Minhiriath units back down here, the Men-at-Arms, several units of Men-at-Arms in fact, and also some Minhiriath archers as well, who are pretty decent with how heavily armoured they are. Then, further down the hill, is this still Cardland? Nope, this is Hazrama, that is a name I recognise actually, it's just been a while since I've seen him play. He's playing as Linden, some Noldoran Blade Masters over here, as well as some Tharbad Warhammers from Merciful X over there, and then the rest of the Linden army is over here getting ready to face off against the first of the blue team armies we'll go and have a look at. 4 Linden Archers, of course, nice, long range, damaging, but obviously lightly armoured. Noldorin Guard just in behind them, the mighty Horse Lords of Ulmo, if they can avoid range fire. They're an absolutely devastating unit of knights, as well as some 4 Linden Pikemen and Harlinden Infantry altogether, as well as some Mithlon Pikemen, and then the final line, some Mithlon Swordmasters, so the Linden variant of heavy elven swordsmen. Now, the first of the blue team army, we have the other dwarves. We have Sharkan, who's going to be playing as Erebor. He's got a very interesting formation here, this sort of arrowhead in behind all of his skirmishers and miners. So again, another name I don't recognise, so we'll see how well he can do when placed under pressure from a Linden force. Some Dwarven miners, the armour piercing, not going to be terribly useful, but for the most part, most Dwarven players use their miners as chaff anyway. Some Ironfoot crossbows, who could be very useful even against a lightly armoured faction like Linden, just for their stopping power. We'll see though, because obviously they're going to be outranged here, Erebor, so Linden can certainly just pressure Erebor into being the ones to move first, and if I know anything, it's that a newer player wants to be defensive. So even when placed under range fire, they may just sit here and take it, which even though the dwarves can with their armour and shields, it's probably not advisable to just sit there and accept the damage the elves are dishing out. We'll see what Sharkan does there though, when that situation inevitably arises. Some Ironfoot Spears, forming up the arrowhead formation he has. Most of his army is hidden behind the hill, so that's good map awareness. We have some Erebor Legionaries, of course, very nice unit of line infantry that should be able to go toe-to-toe with most of what Linden has. Ironfoot Spears back here, we've got some Cav, so some Ironfoot Wargoats and some Hammer Guard. Very strong Cav, this is something else which really sets Erebor apart from Khazad-dûm. Obsidian Guard, Dragon Slayers and Highborn, so much like Khazad-dûm on the other side, they've gone for all of the elite units. You can see here 68 Obsidian Guards, 68 Dragon Slayers and 69 Highborns, so that's where the general is, King Dane himself. Some Axe Throwers, some Blacklock Engineers and some Erebor Legionaries. If you can get the Blacklock Engineers into a good position to shoot, you pretty much win as Erebor, but we'll see if they can do that here with Linden, because I would imagine a newer player is probably going to be more defensive, but he may surprise me. Then we have Dark God Morgoth, another name that I do not recognise, who's going to be playing as Numenor. Some Romena Nardukadar here on the front line, armour-piercing spears of the higher tier variety. Romena Abarim also forming up a front line over here. We've got some Balagai footmen with the armour upgrade as well, so, that's good. A little bit tankier against the Cardland forces, some Balagai archers up here. The rest of his army is spreading down here, some Narunara Royal Guard, Royal Legion, the rest of his army down here. He is a little bit spread out, so if Cardland is quick and rushes Numenor, they may find themselves undermanned on the higher ground. Seafarers of Nindamos, Narun-Aru Sentinels, some Pharazim Swordmasters, some more Romena Nardukadar and Balagai footmen, as well as some more Seafarers. Pretty balanced army over here, and then of course the Romena Boabrim. Not a lot of ammunition on them, but armour piercing of course. Could be very effective in this situation. But again, I would say that a player completely new to the game is more likely to just sort of dump their ammunition into whatever, rather than picking and choosing their targets with a unit like that. And then the final army we're going to have a look at is the player who sent me the replay, so this is going to be Safi. They've got some Elvellyn infantry here on the front line, as well as some Elvellyn Vineguard and some Morroquendi pikes, backed up by some Kelvin River Patrol and a couple of units of Nandor Glade Guard. So this is the initial army that's going to be facing off as Mirkwood threatens to come barreling down upon them. The Dorwinian general is way back over here, the Morroquendi Glade Masters. I think that's just because they were, Safi probably forgot to move them. More than anything else, because there's no real reason to keep them that far back away from your army. You can actually there's some, that's interesting. You can actually deploy way over here. Will that actually serve a purpose? It kind of does actually, because they can go up right the way around. So some Erin Vaughan Axemen, some Morroquendi Bows and some Nandor Glade Guard as well. And then the Archer Corps, I'm sure we've got some Morroquendi Glade Lords, some Elvellyn Hammer Guard, and then up here we have some Elvellyn Marksmen already in range, I think, of the Mirkwood forces because of their really big elevation advantage, and then some Keldwyn River Patrol as well, so some more javelins. But without further ado, let's begin. And I would imagine this is where the action is going to happen almost immediately, because here we can see the Elvellyn Marksmen are going to open up onto the Mirkwood positions. It'll be interesting to see how Mirkwood decide to handle this, because it's a very unorthodox army that he has brought, as I said. So with all of these Hiri Lung, I mean, it's a fairly scary array of elven infantry, to be honest with you, but he would certainly be well advised to not simply go charging in to this particular situation. The Elvellyn Marksmen are firing away, but I'm not sure what's at, because I don't think they seem to be hitting much of anything over here. The Elven King's Palace Guard is over there, and of course Dorwinian and Numenor together could probably crush Mirkwood underfoot quickly, but you know, Khazad-dûm are going to come over here and try and shore things up, and Numenor are going to be moving off as well. Interestingly enough, you can actually see that over here is another area where the battle is going to get underway fairly quickly. You can see here Dunedain Rangers revealing themselves, but again, in fire at will, they're going to be firing right up into the air, and to be honest with you, this canyon face is so steep, even by doing that they may not hit anything. But Dark God Morgoth is going to form up a front line here to block any sort of Cardlan advance. We'll see if that bears any fruit, because Cardlan are coming forward. I mean, another thing that new players don't tend to do is be aggressive, and be aggressive in numbers. They tend to be very conservative, trying to sort of preserve their manpower, but Cardlan have got a lot of men on the field. They may be a little bit susceptible from a morale standpoint, but this manpower could be very useful for them, especially seeing as Mirkwood, you can see here that a bunch of Woodland Realm Axemen have now revealed themselves. Hiri Lang following them in Woodland Realm Patrol, so there you can see the full extent of the Mirkwood army, but it's still honestly not a massive army. Keldwyn River Patrol starting to fire away, although will they actually be able to hit anything with this angle? I'm not really sure Javelins are best used here. Javelins are best used a little bit more up close and personal, and to be honest with you, if Dorwinian are not able to utilise their archers to good effect here, they'll find themselves on the wrong end of this melee engagement, because Woodland Realm Axemen here, very accomplished in melee, obviously dual-wielding Axemen, so they've got decent skill, but also good damage. And if they're being backed up by those heavy swordsmen as well, like those Javelins are hitting them, but they don't have the best angle. They're already shaken though, these Woodland Realm Axemen. The pikes here in the middle of this front line, the Morroquendi pikes, are probably going to be the biggest thing that Mirkwood are going to have working against them here. As you can see here, the Ents also charging right on in here, but Dorwinian are going to be able to shut them down. The Nandor Glade Guard are a very good choice for facing off against units like Trolls and Ents, because they've got a lot of damage, they've got AP, all the sorts of things which that kind of unit doesn't really do all that well against. Keldwyn River Patrol taking some damage, but you can see here that Mirkwood's advance has been stopped by this solid Dorwinian phalanx, and also the engagements here are good. Dorwinian are not really able to get there. Well, now you can see the Elvelyn marksmen are in position, so Dorwinian definitely going to be in the ascendancy here in this engagement against Mirkwood. Meanwhile over here, all quiet on this front still. Cardlan not too eager to be the ones to make the first move against Numenor, but the reverse is also true. What about over here? You can see here the Ironfoot crossbows and the War Goats trying to move forward to make something happen, but the forces of Linden are going to be over here. You can actually see the Dwarven miners have charged right on in here, but excuse me, the Noldering Guard under normal circumstances would be enough to kill them off, but the Noldering Guard are actually retreating, perhaps at the sight of the scrambling Dwarven cavalry. But I mean, the problem that the Dwarves are certainly going to have here is they're not really cut out for a long range engagement with the Elves. Like the Ironfoot crossbows can skirmish, but the Elves can just keep cycling back and hit and running them, so it's an interesting situation for the Dwarves of Erebor to be in, and how a newer player reacts to that will be interesting to see. Meanwhile, the Elven forces on this front line, I'm not sure why the frame rate is dipping so badly in areas like this. You can see here the Hiri Lang are getting in here, and from a melee perspective, if not for those pikes, the Dorwinian Elvelyn units would be struggling in this situation, but the Dorwinian front line is holding very firmly at the moment. You can see over here though, the Keldwyn River Patrol, they are fighting to the death now. They took so many losses from the Mirkwood archers, as you would probably expect. The problem that they're going to have over here, I think, the blue team, is the fact that Khazad-dûm are heading towards this location. You can see right up there on the hillside, the Morroquendi bows are going to start to fire. Try and do some damage perhaps into the backs of these Mirkwood forces, because I think they need to deal with Mirkwood as quickly as they possibly can. They've had a very good start to this engagement. The men clad in purple and silver. But as soon as Khazad-dûm arrives, it turns into a very different fight, because there's only so much this infantry line is going to be able to do before it starts to take a lot of damage, but they are holding very firm here. You can see here that the balance of forces is evenly matched, so without all of this range support they're receiving from on high, from their Elvelyn marksmen, they would be struggling in this situation because of how good Mirkwood are in melee in this sort of fight. But of course Mirkwood, even with their armour upgrade, are not really designed to take a beating over a long period of time from ranged. Elvelyn marksmen, they're not really a damage dealing archer, that's not really their main purpose, but here they should be able to rack up a good amount of kills. You can see there the Woodland Realm Patrol are trying to kill off those Javelins, doing a pretty good job at shutting down the Keldwyn River Patrol, but the beauty of them of course is they're so cheap that if you are Dorwinian or Dale, the other factions who have access to them, you don't mind too much when you lose them. Like, yeah, it's a shame you don't get to access the damage that they can deal quickly, but It's not a big investment that you've made, not like something like the Elder Council. Meanwhile, over here, Dwarven miners are still over here, the Dwarven Cavalry trying to make something happen. You can see here Hazarama charging in with his Horse Lords of Ulmo. This is a real battle of the Titans here, as the Horse Lords of Ulmo and Iron for Hammerguard collide with one another. The close proximity of those crossbows could be just the thing, though, to tilt this fight in favour of the Iron for Hammerguard. And I do actually think the Iron for Hammerguard are a little bit more well suited to a bogged down melee fight like this, and you can see the close proximity to the Dwarves has yielded massive results there as the Horse Lords have almost sent packing. Yeah, the Iron for Hammerguard are another, like, Erebor are honestly my least favourite faction in 0.97, just because of things like that. Like, they're good at too many things for me. Yes, they've got gaps, but their strengths are so defined that it's... The Iron for Hammerguard shouldn't be able to wipe away a unit like Horse Lords of Ulmo like that, because the crossbows didn't even get a volley into them, to be honest. So I can't really defend Erebor for having access to such a powerful tool like that. Of course, you could also say that Lyndon should have supported their own cavalry better, and Lyndon's cavalry should absolutely have lost that engagement because of how, you know, gung-ho they were sending their cavalry in so close to enemy territory. But not to that extreme. Not to that extreme. Meanwhile, Cardlin and Numenor are still just grinding up against one another, playing tag. Not really achieving much of anything, but it's over here still, where the biggest fight is still happening. And you can see now that the Dwarves are getting onto the front line, this fight is switching in favour of the attackers. Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood together is a very powerful combination. Khazad-dûm bring the armour and the expertise in attrition-based warfare. Mirkwood bring the damage and the skill. And that's a bad situation for Dorwinion to be in, especially now as they've been given a taste of their own medicine. The Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm are now able to shoot into the backs of the Dorwinion lines, and even with their heavy armour, their shields will not be coming into effect here, and Khazad-dûm are just waiting for the opportune moment to strike with their infantry. But I would say as well that, I mean, Dorwinion started off this fight just as you would expect, but Numenor needed to come over here and help. Like, Dorwinion was always going to be the one to go up against two armies, and just a couple of units from Numenor would have helped hold this line down a little better. As you can see now, Alvelin marksmen are running, the front line is starting to break. They've managed to kill off the Ents, and they've managed to do some pretty grievous damage to Mirkwood, but Khazad-dûm is going to be in very good condition to continue the forward march, and Dorwinion's army is going to be in tatters. We'll see if they can make a recovery, because they still have a good amount of resources that they can use, including, of course, the mighty Glade Lords. And I'm not really sure that Khazad-dûm has got anything to really stop the Glade Lords outside of their Spearmen. And you can cycle charge in and out of Spearmen if you're careful. Nandor Glade Guard still fighting, of course. The Nandor units for Dorwinion, very much glass cannons, can deal exceptional amounts of damage, especially off the charge, but they don't really have any longevity in a fight, especially not when we're talking about being hit by ranged units. The mirror opposite, really, to the scale mail-clad dwarves that they're fighting now. Helvelin Vinegard broken and fighting to the death, taking those hits from the Orc Hunters up on top of the raised ground. Yeah, you can see there that I'm sure what Numenor is going to be planning on doing, as there is actually a melee engagement happening now, the Balagaya footmen being swallowed whole by this much more substantial Cardlin force. I'm not sure why Cardlin's retreating, honestly. Cardlin has got the better end of this engagement. Again, maybe a little bit of an experience showing here, because I mean, if Cardlin continues to just fight here, backing up his infantry with those pikes, Numenor will start to feel the pressure, but without those pikes on the front line, these Minhiriath spearmen are going to get put into boxes by the Nardukadar and the Abarim. They just do not have the quality to maintain against those kinds of units. Meanwhile, some routing units of Ironfoot crossbows, which is a bad sign for the dwarves. They really can't afford to be losing their crossbows in a fight like this. Lyndon, though, as they should, are playing the long game here. If they got too greedy, if they charge forward too quickly, I've learnt myself that Lyndon don't do too well when you're wading through a hailstorm of ranged fire, especially not against units like the Ironfoot crossbows, but especially not the Blacklocks, who are up on the hill ready. And the Ironfoot axe throwers are honestly a very good unit to bring against Lyndon as well, because they can really be an excellent phalanx buster. Meanwhile, Mirkwood, Kanzo, being bailed out of hot water a little bit by Froggy as he moves forward with his Dwarven army, but Dorwinion's resistance has been broken despite starting off this fight very nicely. It was always going to be their fate once the Dwarves moved forward if they weren't going to receive any assistance from their allies. You can see over here, though, Dorwinion do still have a bit of an expeditionary force up on this mountainside. I'll be interested to see how that factors in, because it does mean that Dorwinian have some units behind enemy lines, as it were. They still have some forces over there which they're going to use to link up with Numenor and hold the central mountain, so we won't be seeing this particular peak being used in today's battle, I do not think. And of course, with some assistance from the dwarves and Mirkwood being forthcoming, maybe Cardland will also kick it into high gear against Numenor through this narrow pass. Minhiriath archers also firing into the Numenorean front line, but they are reforming their position, and when the shields are pointing the right direction, Minhiriath archers won't be able to do too much damage. But I mean, Numenor running a little bit low on manpower here. Like I said, if Cardland really wanted to, they could come forward in numbers and smash this front line to pieces. There are reinforcements that are right next to it, of course, but I mean, you'd be surprised how quickly a front line can fall apart and a situation can spiral out of control if you move forward in force, because then Cardland could have this whole area just in a big ball of chaos, and then with the armies coming around from the back, could be pretty good for them. Meanwhile, we do have a joint Numenor and Dorwinian front line now. It's very makeshift though, with Belagaya footmen, Celdwin River Patrol and Elvelen marksmen. Not going to be sufficient to stop a full march from Mirkwood and Khazad-dûm again, I do not think. We shall see. But it's good that Dorwinian recognised when things were going south and did try to save some stuff for later, which is a good sign. And obviously Safi has played the game before, but I would suggest that a lot of players, they're a little bit guilty perhaps of just sort of when they see a situation's going bad, they don't even try to save units, they just sort of leave them in there to perish, which is not great. Ironfoot crossbows again trying to come forward to maybe skirmish, as are the Ironfoot hammer guard, but again, not the sort of warfare that the dwarves are going to want to engage in here, especially not when they turn their backs to the Forlinden archers, negating those dwarven shields. Again, going to trudge forwards. Yeah, Linden is still in a pretty good place. They've still got some Noldorin guard, as well as their Noldorin blade masses in pretty good health, honestly. That one unit did take some damage, but it wasn't for nothing. It was in a defensive manner. But yeah, with all those Noldorin units in the Mithlon sword mass, as well as that Linden phalanx, like if the dwarves continue to wage their war like this, I'd imagine Linden will win, albeit narrowly, because of course I would imagine that the dwarves have probably got more resources to work with than Linden. But the blue team, I think, need a victory here for Erebor over Linden. And with how strong I believe Erebor are in this patch, it's possible that they can pull this off, in spite of the questionable start they've had. Again, like the Ironfoot axe throwers coming forward here, maybe a bit of a sign of inexperience to send them forward, because of course they're not going to be able to get into range of the Forlinden archers at all easily. Some Ironfoot wargoats way in behind enemy lines over there, doing their thing, trying to come back to maybe harass the Linden lines. Unshielded they are, so a little bit more fragile perhaps. Here come the Morroquendi Glade Lords moving in and getting a good charge off here onto the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm. So here is where we'll learn just how resilient to a unit of knights the Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood armies are, because this is where Safi can make back a lot of kills, but it's also where they could end up losing their cavalry, because you can see here 4th Legion coming from this angle, Sons of the Fallen coming from the other way. And trading your Morroquendi Glade Lords for just a single unit of Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm would certainly not be worth it, so they need to get out of here quickly, I think. Now we'll see how Dorwinian's Cav micro is. And you can see here that they're moving in once again. Mirkwood being the tip of the spear, the Elvelen Hammerguard charging downhill into the 3rd Legion. That's going to be really painful for them. Elvelen Hammerguard are going to be able to pace those Dwarven line infantry. And again, as they spread out, they need to send forward a few more units, and they are now with some Woodland Realm Patrol, which is good to see, because if they can keep up the pressure here on Dorwinian and Numenor, they should be able to maintain their forward march. The Morroquendi Glade Lords do manage to squeak by. They get through before the Sons of the Fallen can cut off their escape route, which is good. It means that these knights can continue to do their thing, but there's more Sons of the Fallen, there's more Orc Hunters, so this cavalry is still very much in enemy territory. Over here, meanwhile, yeah, you can see here the Elvelen Hammerguard doing some nice damage. They got some good kills off the charge. Elvelen marksmen and Belagaya footmen continuing to fight hard, but again, the quality of the elves and the dwarves here should be enough to kill most of these Elvelen off. Here though, we can see the cavalry still hasn't escaped from this particular area, and they are in a lot of trouble if they get bogged down in melee with the Sons of the Fallen. Sons of the Fallen are an absolutely fantastic unit of spears, even against a unit of resilient knights like the Morroquendi Glade Lords. They are going to be able to get away just about. And off they go. It's a good opportunity actually to maybe go over and help Erebor more so than anything else, because I think Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood are going to be just fine at dealing with this sort of thing. Speaking of Erebor, they have moved forward. They've taken the initiative here, and so have Linden. So very quickly, both sides have decided to dispense with the pleasantries and are now just going to get down to brass tacks in melee. And this will be an interesting engagement. The Dwarves have got more in the way of really high tier stuff with the Obsidian Guard, Dragon Slayers and Highborns, but Linden have their phalanx. They have a lot of heavy elven swordsmen. They also have Wardens of Elos Tyrion, albeit they're being mulched by Ironfoot Wargoats as it stands. What have we got over here? Ironfoot crossbows. Ironfoot axe throwers are going to be doing that thing as well. Like, the axe throwers could be a real MVP here, because if they can really... Against Linden, a unit of axe throwers can be devastating. Against the Mithlon Swordmasters and the Mithlon Pikemen, they are going to be absolutely ideal. But they need to do this quickly, because their Ironfoot spears are not going to be able to hold back the Noldorin Blade Masters and the Mithlon Swordmasters for long. The Erebor Legionaries will do slightly better. Most of the elites are on this side, the Ironfoot Hammer Guard giving them a hand, but it's going to be a very bloody fight here between Erebor and Linden. Hazrama charging in. He was perhaps hoping that the fight would be a little bit more drawn out, but I'm glad actually that this Dwarven player decided to really take the bull by the horns and force Linden's hand. Linden could have tried to kite backwards with their archers, but in the end they didn't, and I think that's to their credit, the fact that they decided to take this challenge head on. It's a very... Here you can see the Blackblocks are trying to get into position, but Hazrama is having none of that. He's chasing them off with Mithlon Swordmasters. Those Wardens of Elos Tyrion are getting into melee. Very mixed fortunes here, I think, for both sides. They're both winning in different areas of the battlefield. Here, though, a massive blob of Linden forces, taking hits from the axe throwers, but there's so many of them that the Dwarves are continuing to struggle, to be honest. Meanwhile, over here, Dorwinian's front line is still holding on just about. You can see over here that now the Elvel Hammer Guard, they were unfortunately completely isolated over here, which does of course mean the Dwarves, Froggy doing exactly the right thing, rather than just sort of grinding up against the front of the Hammer Guard, which would have been devastating for his 3rd Legion. He instead decided to peel off a couple more units, completely surround them, and now the Elvel Hammer Guard will be overwhelmed and, you would think, destroyed. Here you can see some Seafarers of Nindamos getting down here too late though, as still the Khazad-dûm Mirkwood momentum doesn't really show many signs of slowing down. The Seafarers of Nindamos are going to try and use their javelins here, but I don't think they're going to be able to do the damage that they want. Ooh, dear, oh dear. That's a big frame drop there. Forward come yet more forces from Khazad-dûm. What's happening here in the middle? It looks as though it's still... Well, to be fair, Cardlin and Numenor have engaged with one another once again, but it's still Cardlin... Well, Cardlin have got their pikes, they've got some armour-piercing infantry here in the form of the mercenaries as well, so Numenor may struggle here just over the long haul. Erebor killing off the Linden General, which is more important for them to achieve. After all, if Erebor lose their general, it could be pretty devastating, and there you can see the power of the Blacklock Engineers splitting the Linden front line in half, and of course Linden, not a lot of armour. Not that armour really saves you against the Blacklock Engineers, but Linden do not do well under this sort of duress against a normal kind of unit, let alone the Blacklocks. And the Glade Lords did come over here, so despite Dorwinian being forced onto the back foot by the arrival of Khazad-dûm, they're still doing a job for their team, which is good to see. Getting over here with the Knights, and that should be enough to send Linden into full retreat. It's like a Gatling gun, isn't it? Still a few Linden forces left fighting over here, up against the Highborns, though. There's also, you know, the Dragon Slayers are still actually completely healthy, which is surprising. They must have been at the back of the fight, because the Obsidian Guard have taken losses, the Highborns have taken quite a few losses actually, but yeah, this is going to be Linden being turfed out, which does mean that Erebor could put Cardlin under a little bit of pressure. We'll see if that bears any fruit for the blue team. Morroquendi Glade Lords coming over in support. The Dragon Slayers finally lost a model there. And the Blacklocks just letting these High Elves flee for the hills. Meanwhile, Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood both having better luck as they continue to press forwards. I think it's been very... In spite of Mirkwood's very unorthodox army composition, they and Khazad-dûm have done a very good job thus far of continually pushing back Dorwinian. But Dorwinian, it's not really their fault, because again, if they were going to hold off against two armies, even one as strangely constructed as Mirkwood, they would have needed some assistance from Numenor. And to be frank, Numenor doesn't really have many excuses for not sending over support, because they haven't really been placed under huge pressure from Cardlin. And they're still fighting over here, but of course this is really just a force which is just here to get as many kills as it can. because all of their forces are now pulling back over to here, which we haven't seen a mountain pass in all the time that I've been doing Third Age content. We haven't seen a mountain pass battle finish on a final stand on this particular ridgeline, which is strange. We also haven't really seen that part of the map use this particular mountain. It's always either this one, this area that we see here, or down over here, or behind that that mountain there. Blackblock Engineers continuing to trudge their way forwards. I mean, Erebor's army is a little bit scattered at this point, and if Cardlin has some battlefield awareness here, you can see they have already turned around some units, so they know that Erebor is going to be coming their way. But one thing they could really do to pile the pressure on Erebor would be to send some Minhiriath sharpshooters over here, because then they can subject the dwarves to some withering crossbow fire, give Erebor a taste of their own medicine. See here the Remena Abarim continuing to fight hard on the front line, but obviously this is a rather doomed endeavour. The combination of Minhiriath men-at-arms, mercenary guildsmen, and Greenway garrison footmen going to be enough to seize victory here in the long run. Some routing Elvellyn marksmen heading this way. You can see over here Khazad-dûm are coming in, so before they move in to assault Dark God Morgoth and Safi's remaining position, they are going to head over here to just make sure that Cardlin is free to reinforce them, because they will need Cardlin's numbers. You know, Khazad-dûm and Mirkwood have definitely taken their share of casualties as they have made their way through the Dorwinian positions. Minhiriath sharpshooters just kind of hanging out. There's another unit over here as Erebor continue to slowly trudge their way into position in true Dwarven fashion. I mean, Erebor's army is not particularly massive at this point, if we're being honest. But they still have a force which Cardlin can't afford to ignore, which is going to be important from a blue team perspective. What's going on over here? Oh, I see, Noldorin Blade Masters from Linden running away. Here we can see the Naru Aru Royal Guard now opening up. And they are fighting at the Orc Hunters, so they're going to be eager here, I think, to have ranged superiority, and the Naru Aru Royal Guard will easily be able to kill off them. But the Bawabarim also firing at them, I think, which again is another example of a little bit of inexperience. Well, actually, no, they're firing. No, they are. They're firing at the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, which, to be fair, is melting them. But you don't really want to be using Bawabarim ammunition on Orc Hunters if you can help it. Also, the same thing over here with the Seafarers, like they're throwing their javelins into already depleted units of 3rd Legion that were subjected to the Hammer Guard. So, for me, I mean, there is a danger here that Froggy. I mean, honestly, if I was Numenor and Dorwinian here, I would counterattack into this Khazad-dûm force. It is nowhere near substantial enough to withstand a downhill charge from all those Numenoreans, because the rest of their reinforcements are way too far away. But the longer that Numenor wants to hold this defensive position, the more time that the dwarves will have to get into their position. Over here, the Khazad-dûm reinforcements, the 4th Legion coming over to help finish off those Numenoreans. Cardlin now free to move as they see fit, and they still have a good amount of manpower to their name as well, which will worry the defenders, I'm sure. In come the Woodland Realm Patrol. Mirkwood has probably been the most eager to be aggressive in this fight so far, but I'm not really sure how much manpower Mirkwood have left. Here are the Woodland Realm Patrol. They're just going to charge on in here because they won't make very much headway all on their lonesome against Naru and Aru Sentinels, and indeed they are just going to charge right on in. Bold, but foolish. Some more damage coming in from those Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, trying to do some attritional damage as Mirkwood make their way in. Khazad-dûm are now going to charge in, and with the support of these Mirkwood units, Khazad-dûm are going to be able to stand up to this sort of assault much more quickly. And then, of course, as if that wasn't enough, Cardlin are also going to be able to send reinforcements over as well. So their opportunity there to quickly deal with a pocket of Dwarven resistance was quickly taken away from them. Remena and Nar-Dûkadar holding the front line. Their armour piercing will be handy against the dwarves, even if the spear malice will not. There's a lot of Hiri Lang as well, but Numenor here relying on the strength of their Naru and Aru Sentinels to help hold the line. There's a lot of Numenor left, though, to be fair. Like, Cardlin didn't lose much in those engagements, but then neither did Numenor, so in a defensive situation like this, who knows? And here you can see, running into place, we have the Minhiriath sharpshooters. If they get into position, then they can really do some damage to the Numenorean line. I really fear for the blue team here. They are immediately going to start taking damage, which, I mean, in this case it's fair. Like, the sharpshooters represent such a threat damage-wise to the front line, they can't afford to just leave them be. So they need to do something to them, and with all of these dwarves, elves, and now men making their way to the front line, it'll have to be from afar. And the crossbows, they're doing the right thing by ignoring the archers and going straight for the infantry line. Having said that, this front line does need more reinforcing from the attackers, because it's not going to stand up too much longer to this pressure from Numenor. 4th Legion Shield Guard also trudging their way into position. How are Erebor getting along here? They've got some Hammer Guard heading up the hill. The Cardland have migrated their entire army here, and of course all they really need to do is keep some pikes back here to make sure that Erebor can't charge in with their cav, and keep a couple of units of infantry as well for when Erebor inevitably make their way up the hill with all of those infantrymen. Hearthguard of Amon Sul making their way forward, another unit of archers which can be used to try and whittle down this front line. You can see here that these 3rd Legion infantrymen have really made some decent headway, but they're going to be stopped dead in their tracks by some Bawabarim and some Habarim. There's also the mighty Morakwendi Glade Masters in there, who, if I were the attackers, I'd definitely be trying to focus them down. Certainly one of those units of infantry that is certainly to be feared. You can see here there's some Nardukadar which are kind of isolated, but having said that, they're quite comfortable in melee here against the 4th Legion, their armour piercing, standing them in good stead. There's another unit of 4th Legion on the way though, so they could end up getting overwhelmed through sheer numbers. Still these crossbows continuing, and they have a perfect shot here, and ultimately this damage, can Numenor really withstand it for this length of time? I'm not so sure. Minhiriath archers also doing their thing, so now Cardlan, having been bottled up by Numenor in that canyon for a while, is now venting their anger primarily through ranged units. Mirkwood still hanging on. They were shaken for a little while there, but now they're steady. Sons of the Fallen on the front line as well. I mean, this is the issue. Like, if you're relying on infantry power to see you over the line against someone like Khazad-dûm, you're always in for a potentially rough ride of things. But there is also these units down here. Let's not forget, Dorwinion did sequester away those Nandor Glade Guard, the Erinvorn Axemen, and also a unit of Morakwendi Bows. It's not like it's hardly the Rohirrim charging over the hill, but it's still something which the attackers are going to have to consider. They're going to need to leave something in the tank to be able to deal with these units, like the Glade Guard in particular. Not exactly the sort of thing you want charging into you in the late game. Meanwhile, you can see here the Iron for Axe Throwers doing some damage here to this Cardland front line, trying to soften them up so that their infantry can come forward and smash the Wardens out the way. But I think they're trying to go for the Wardens of Tir Gorthar, but unfortunately for them, based on how the units are arranged, the Mercenary Guildsmen are the ones which are taking the damage, the metallic clanging sounds as they hit. But still, these will be kills that will be helpful in the long run, but probably not the ones they wanted. It was probably the Wardens they were going for, probably, giving the Erebor player the benefit of the doubt. The Blacklocks, however, will prove to be a much harsher task for Cardland to deal with, because if they stay in that position, they're just going to get shredded by them. Forward come the Dunedain Rangers, more Cardland forces, the Minhiriath Spearmen are mobilised. Still this frontline battle rages on, with yet more dwarves and men joining the front line to try and bring Numenor to heel. Still units in the background over there. You can see the Morakwendi Glade Masters are actually retreating, running away as it were. Belagair archers continuing to try and skirmish down the Cardland sharpshooters, but I mean they're kind of powerless here. The sharpshooters are going to take their toll on Numenor, but Numenor themselves are also going to take their toll on these infantrymen that are attacking their position. Been an interesting fight so far. In come the Naruna Roar Guards, shoring up this section of the line, relieving some of the beleaguered Nardukadar that were holding the line. More Minhiriath Spearmen arriving on the scene to continue the momentum. There's a lot of dwarves here, a lot of warriors of Khazad-dûm. The 3rd Legion mostly being expended earlier in the fight, but the warriors of Khazad-dûm are no slouches, and in the numbers that they're in, it's still going to be a real challenge for Numenor to deal with all of them like this. There's still Royal Legion of Armanelos and Pharazim Swordmasters to be sent forward as well, though, let's not forget. One of them should probably be on the front line now, to be honest with you. Make a very good centre. The Naruna Sentinels are still here, as well as the Royal Guard, so that's some good inspiration. But I think the Pharazim Swordmasters, especially the killing power that they offer, would be very nice. Minhiriath Sharpshooters trying to retreat there. The Mithril Guard and the Legion Bodyguard, though, forcing a hole there, and this could be the end for this Numenorean front line. I think Khazad-dûm They're going to try and work up the line, and they will succeed at this. I'm not entirely sure why all of these units are actually leaving the front line. It may be because Erebor are bearing down on them and Cardland want more of their army to face off against them. The Axtras, I think, have already used up all their ammunition. It's a limited effect. The shields of the mercenary guildsmen pointing in the right direction. Decent armour on them as well. But it's the Blacklocks and the Ironfoot crossbows that Cardland need to be concerned about, because you can kiss goodbye to these units if you allow the Blacklock engineers to just have their way with them. But Shah Khan over here may be actually just retreating his Blacklock engineers around the corner, which is a bit of a mistake. I mean, they're needed now. I think the Dorwinian reinforcements are actually going with Erebor as well, rather than going around this way. They're going to try and centralise their attack, their relief force, as it were. But here you can see the Mithril Guard and the Legion Bodyguard doing their thing, and this Numenor front line is collapsing now. The gap was made by the Dwarves, and now Numenor are in real trouble. Numenor sending forward their Royal Legion of Armenelos, but again, it's a very new player mistake to make, thinking that you should leave your really elite units for the end because they're your elites. It's not very sound logic in Reforged, and I think this is going to be a most harsh lesson for the Numenorean player here, that is not something you want to do, ever, really. Having those units earlier on can really help you, and I think, you know, both the Dwarven factions have displayed why you want your elites to be in the thick of the action here, because when Erebor committed them against Linden, they were in massive trouble. And when Khazad committed them here against Numenor, the same has happened. Over here, Thranduil has been rowed down by the Morroquendi Glade Lords, who are now going to try and come in and salvage some kind of situation here, as they do manage to charge into the Dunedain Rangers, but I don't know. I think the situation is pretty bad here for the defenders. I mean, they could do a lot of damage here, the Glade Lords, but is it going to be enough? No, I'm not so sure. It's a big blob of attacking manpower out over here. Yeah, these Glade Masters, they, again, from Safi, retreating them too far away when they need to they need to toe the team line. They need to stay with their men. They can't just run away. I mean, what would you think if the most elite soldiers in your army suddenly turn tail and run from the front line? Like, that's how so many battles in history were decided, because then the rest of the army just fled as well. Royal Legion of Armenelos and Pharazim Swordmasters fighting their hardest. I mean, even with the Glade Masters at this point, they're going to struggle. But they need to put some sort of resistance here. They need to give Erebor, who are going to be the last blue team army left standing, I would imagine, they need to give Erebor the fighting chance of trying to do something here in the late game. The pikes are actually being peeled off here. Erebor, to be fair to them, are being very slow as well. Like, they probably don't fancy their chances in this sort of fight. But again, they don't have much choice. Like, sometimes you think you've got time in these sorts of battles, and you really don't. Like, the battle is already getting away from them. Here are the Glade Lords, still running down stragglers here in the backfield, but it's like a big blob of angry Westerners, Dwarves, and Wood Elves. They're just continuing to batter on this front line. You can see here the Glade Master back, and they should be able to mulch their way through Warriors of Khazad fairly comfortably, honestly. Pharazim Swordmaster still fighting the Royal Legion of Armenelos. Will their additional manpower be enough to make a difference? Dunedain Rangers continuing to shoot into this front line. There's still a fairly long way in this battle to go, so it's not as if the defenders are about to go quietly into that good night. Some Tharbad Warhammers over here. They're doing their best to sort of zone out the Glade Lords, and to be fair, they have turned around stuff like their crossbows and some of their archers to try and do just that. So the Knights don't have much longer left in them, I don't think. Ironfoot crossbows charging in, but I mean, the Ironfoot crossbows, I mean, they're strong, of course, they're dwarves, so they're going to be able to look after themselves in melee to an extent, but I mean, Hiriath men-at-arms are dedicated infantry, and now that pikes are moving forward, it's going to be an easy task for them to hold. I'm glad to see that Erebor are sending forward the rest of their army as well, so this should be enough to make this fight flick back in favour of Erebor. Over here, Dunedain Rangers still firing away. The elites of Numenor and Dorwinian doing their best to kill as many as they possibly can, but of course Khazad can provide elites of just as high a quality, and they're being backed up by a lot of support as well, so it's only a matter of time here before Numenor and Dorwinian's resistance is finally going to be broken. As especially with all this range support coming in. I love the look of the Pharazim Swordmasters, I have to say. They look like paladins. White Knights. Sons of the Fallen trying to push their way through here. So again, Froggy, the most experienced player in this lobby, sort of showcasing that again, sort of pushing through with his dwarves, and he is going to try and work up the line once again. It worked once before, and it's definitely going to work now, because I mean they've got nothing else to even attempt to stop him, really. Meanwhile, Greenway Garrison footmen rotating around. Cardland continuing to try and hold this front line, but Cardland maybe making a bit of a mistake here, just leaving sort of a token force over here. Erebor will be able to mulch their way through this pretty quickly. You can see here the Dragon Slayers of Arad Mithrin are going to be able to chew through these men that are trying to hold the mountain pass. Cardland setting up a secondary line. Units like the Tharbad Warhammers will be substantially better at holding back the Erebor counter-attack. There is also, of course, the Morroquendi Glade Lords preparing to pounce yet again. And to be fair, the attackers, they don't have infinite manpower here. They need to be a little bit careful. Forward comes another unit of Minhiriad Spearmen to try and break the will of these defenders. There's still quite a lot of Pharazim Swordmasters, to be honest with you. Like, I'm not sure what's on the front line, but it can't be the most damaging units, because these guys are still doing very well for themselves. Morroquendi Glade Masters being put under pressure now by the Sons of the Fallen. In come the Morroquendi Glade Lords, getting a charge into the Dunedain Rangers. Nothing too devastating as far as casualties go, though. Another unit of Mercenary Guildsmen. So you can see here that Cardland... Well, there goes Cardland's general, and that could be very bad for Cardland. That is probably the Numenorean general, but Cardland's morale, we know how bad that can be. Charging in and out, and you can see Cardland making another sort of newer player mistake here. As his front line starts to fail, he's sending in unit after unit. So he's essentially feeding kills into the dwarves here, when what he really could be doing is just sending forward everything all at once and giving the dwarves a much better fight. I mean, to be fair, Cardland are going to be doing damage to Erebor, and I don't think Erebor are going to have an army of the size that they're going to need to pull this back for the blue team all on their lonesome. They still have some Dorwinian forces back here which can move in, but are Erin Vaughan Axemen the kind of heroes that are needed? Even Nandor Gladeguard, I mean, fragile. Still these Hearthguard watching and waiting. Kanzo, despite his very strange army, is still clinging on. These Pharazim Swordmasters, defeat is almost a certainty. Like, again, I would, you know, bet heavily against Numenor and Dorwinian over here, but they could end up taking enough with them to make this battle interesting. We are into the final 10,000 frames, of course, so certainly the final phases of the battle well and truly upon us. Also the Minhiriad Sharpshooters pulling out those maces. Their AP and melee, of course, a little bit of a help, but they are thoroughly outclassed by Pharazim Swordmasters. The Pharazim, I think, are meeting their match at the hands of the Mithril Guard, Legion Bodyguard, and I would assume the Guards of Khazad-dûm are around here somewhere as well. Yep, they're in there. Blade Masters. Not many of the Royal Legion left. They were front and centre against the Dwarven elites, so that's not too surprising. The Dorwinian Cavalry at this point definitely on its last legs. Cardland, meanwhile, they are sending forward some elites now, which is good to see. Tharbad Warhammer should be very at home fighting against Dwarven infantry, and the Dwarves are taking losses here as they stay in melee. Forward comes yet more Cardland reinforcements. The Wardens of Tyr and Gorthab will be a welcome sight on the front line of Cardland, I'm sure, and the rest of their elites also. Dunedain captains, Hearthguard of Amon-Sul, so the Blacklocks are trying to get into a position to shoot. I mean, even if Erebor do end up making it through here, they're going to be so down on manpower. I think, you know, Dorwinian are here, but again, like I said, it's not as if Dorwinian have got some Glade Masters and all of their best units like the Hammer Guard in the back pocket. It's just some shock infantry that they've got, which, again, probably not what is necessary here as we enter the battle's final phases. Cardland must have lost a lot of manpower over here, though. Finally, the Pharazim Swordmasters. I mean, again, this is another mistake that a newer player can make. Like, there is no purpose behind retreating your Pharazim Swordmasters at this point. Like, the old expression, you can run but you'll only die tired, applies here, because what exactly does he intend to do? Like, he's going to run off, but he's going to have to engage them again. So why not do that where they stood, and at least then they can fight and die alongside the Morroquendi Glade Masters. But as it is, It's unfortunate that the best that Numenor has to offer have outed themselves as cowards in this particular battle. Does he want to be the last player standing? If so, that's quite a greedy mindset to have in a team-based game. Like, if one of you lose, you all lose. There's no getting around that. Dorwinian starting to send forward some units of their own. The Erenvorn Axemen, though, immediately routing, and that's the problem when sort of you're pinning your hopes on slightly lower end units in the late game to win you the battle. This sort of thing can happen. The Erenvorn Axemen immediately panicking in the face of the Cardlin elites and those nasty pikemen that are blocking their way. Still those Dragon Slayers in here though, but Erebor, their assault has ground to a halt here. Cardlin have seen a lot of action in this particular pass, and most of it has been positive for them. There's still some Glade Lords over here, but only 5 of them. There's still some Minhiriath Archers. The Glade Masters are here, still fighting to the death. Again, I've said it before, but I really do like the fact that Dorwinian use those glaives, sort of like a thorned vine effect they've got going on with their blade. Very thematic indeed. You can see still a lot of Minhiriath. I mean, Khazad-dûm don't have that much left, to be fair. Like a couple of units of warriors, some Sons of the Fallen, and then some slightly battered and bruised elite units. There goes the Dorwinian general. That's it for Dorwinian, pretty much. The Glade Lord's the only thing they have left. Still, none of the defenders have fully died off yet. The Pharazim Swordmasters. I was going to say White Knights. They raised the white flag there as they ran away. In comes a rear charge here, actually doing some good damage here, routing some of the Cardlin forces off. That's going to be the last move they make though. Some good routing though, taking advantage of some of Cardlin's fragilities to try and give Erebor at least a fighting chance of doing something here in the late game. Still some Morroquendi bows back there. Do they have ammunition? No. I was going to say, they should have been using their ammunition a little bit sooner, I think, if they did, because those poison arrows would have been very useful against a fragile Cardlin front line. You can see there are a lot of their units routing, actually. Mercenary guildsmen as well as pikes. With the Warns of Tirngorth out holding their ground, the Dunedain captains and Tharbad Warhammers doing the same. Obviously the Hearthguard of Amon Sul will stand and fight to the bitter end, but Erebor giving as good as they get in melee here, as you would expect from the Dwarves. Back here, some Dunedain Rangers. They have returned from routing, and some Dwarves from Khazad-dûm are also on the way to support them. Pretty much everything. Not even acknowledging the Pharazim Swordmasters at this point. There's still some Hammerguard back here. Been trying to feast on the scraps. Doing some decent damage. The pink accented armour. Very interesting aesthetic choice from the stout bearded folk. I guess the pink armour is what they wear when they go out clubbing. Minhiriath men-at-arms filtering in, so just an example of how Cardlin, they were definitely the most numbers-heavy faction, or at least they brought the most numbers-focused army on the field today, and it's paying dividends for them because they're just able to continuously send men into situations, and the blue team at this point almost certainly does not have the manpower to hang with this for too much longer. They're going to fight and die to the bitter end. Morroquendi bows and Nandor Glade Guard coming in here, supporting what's left of the Dwarves. Whatever happens to the Pharazim Swordmasters. Trying to pad their kill count, I see. I say pad their kill count, they're not actually. They're going after Legion Bodyguard and Sons of the Fallen, which probably still will end up being the death of them, to be honest with you. They're large swords. What have we got going on over here? The Mithril Guard and the Guards of Khazad-dûm are going to turn around, I think, sensing the fact that Cardlin is probably going to be okay in this particular situation. Still quite a few Dorwinian elves to cut their way through, but Cardlin have got so many men that even if they die, they're just going to stand and fight here. A lot of men for Dorwinian to try and mulch their way through. Maybe I would I probably would have left one of these units over. I probably would have left the Guards of Khazad-dûm, because I mean there is a danger that Cardlin can end up mass routing now. And that would make the battle a little bit more uncomfortable than it otherwise would need to be. And these Ironfoot Hammerguard trying to do some damage here to the Sons of the Fallen. This is good work. The defenders not quite out of this yet. It's going to be tough for them to fight their way back into this now. I don't think they have enough manpower to really make a genuine fist of this, but they can make the attackers sweat at the very least. Can't imagine the Hammer Guard will last. Well, I mean, yeah, another one falls. Like, if the Sons of the Fallen connect with any of their swings, that's going to be pretty damaging. They're one of the strongest spears in the game, after all. Here comes the Mithril Guard and Guards of Khazad-dûm, so this is the end for the Pharazim Swordmasters, certainly. And they are going to die tired. How about that? In Heliath, men-at-arms routing. I always get nervous when you see Cardland soldiers routing, but I don't think the Dorwinian have got scary enough units on the front line to really cause Cardland to run for the hills. There is a lot of routing in here, but Cardland, just a giant meat shield at this point, a meat blob. Ooh, trying to pad your kills. I see you doing that, Erebor. Trying to feast on those routing men. Pharazim Swordmasters, they will of course fight to the bitter end here, as the Guards of Khazad-dûm and the Mithril Guard kill them off. Yeah, and honestly, like, this battle has been decided. It's been decided since the 25k frame mark, to be honest with you. But to be fair to the defenders, they have fought to the death, which is good. But the attackers here, I think, you know, Froggy as the most experienced player on the field, MVP here, cracking those front lines, taking advantage of the defenders being overly defensive, and yeah, that's what just more familiarity with the game will give you, to be honest with you. I thought Dorwinian did okay as well, to be fair. They were really up against it from the start of the battle, having to deal with two armies rather than just the one, and they're still alive here in the late game. Interesting deployments as well, but ultimately they gave it a good go, but just not enough in the end to make victory for their team. And I'm not really going to be overly critical of too many of the players here, just because clearly newer players, and to be honest with you, not bad. You know, nothing terribly wrong with what they've done. Like, Cardland and Numenor were maybe just a little bit defensive of one another. I was particularly impressed actually with Erebor. Erebor, when they moved forward, they decided to take the fight to Linden, and that was greatly to their benefit. So many newer players are too eager to just sort of sit back and try and be defensive, but that is the sort of thing that being more aggressive can get you. And Linden would have loved it if he just sat back for longer, because then they could have used their 4 Linden Archers and Wardens of Elos Tyrian to better effect, and then Linden could have gone on to win that fight. As it is, Erebor were aggressive, and they won. Rightly so as well. Meanwhile, still some Pharazim Swordmasters alive down here. It's impressive. You can see this guy is just right in and amongst it. That guy there using his spear more like an axe, which, given the side of it, I mean, it's more like a sword spear than a regular spear. The blade on it is so chunky. It's like, what if we took a Dwarven short sword and put it on the end of a really long stick? Famous Dwarven engineering. Speaking of which, the Guards of Khazad-dûm, who have what would be the medieval equivalent of bulletproof armour, so difficult to kill. That third hit point really does set them apart from most other units of bodyguard line infantry, as the Pharazim Swordmasters found out. Froggy using them aggressively as well, in tandem with his Legion Bodyguard and Mithril Guard. That's a really strong central line. It's not as effective as it was in 0.96, but I think this battle shows that it can still be very successful for Khazad-dûm. There goes Erebor, because Numenor is still just about fighting. So Erebor, the first of the blue team armies to fall completely. Numenor will follow them, and that's going to be it for them. And that leaves just Dorwinian putting on a last stand. Nandor Gladeguard victory seems certain. I very much doubt that. Nandor Gladeguard are pretty good in melee, of course. Armor piercing, strong. Got that elven skill, so they're not as flimsy as some of the human axemen are. But ultimately, still a little bit more damage orientated, so it's not as if they're going to be able to kill their way out of this one, especially not when the Mithril Guard and Guards of Khazad-dûm introduce themselves, I'm sure. Some more routing from Cardland. But Cardland, you know, having that numbers-centric army, I think really did help them as well. It allowed them to act just sort of continuously, just sort of send men in. And that was something which the others really did struggle to deal with, I think. But that's just a matter of composition building rather than actual play, so... And Cardland can do that. Of all the Western Kingdoms of men, they're probably the one that can play the numbers game the best. Certainly from an infantry standpoint, obviously cavalry-wise, that's Rohan. Not even close. But on foot, like they and Arthedain can go more numbers heavy. For Cardland, I think it's a little bit more intuitive to do that because they can blanket their line with pikes more easily. Whereas Arthedain, they also have more expensive options across the board, I think. A little bit more of an all-rounder. Cardland pretty popular at .97. I attribute most of that to the crossbows, to be honest, but they do have some other stuff going for them as well. One thing we haven't really seen is their lancers. Like Cardland have got some really, really devastating lancers, but we haven't really seen that in .97 as of yet, because I think most people prefer the security of playing much more defensive with their crossbows. Even on an open field, Cardland can do that, and also being more aggressive with cavalry and the like opens Cardland up to overextending themselves and then inevitably seeing their whole army rout before them. Nandor Bladeguard still holding on. I mean, they are fighting off against primarily spears and out-of-ammunition skirmishers, so when the dwarves finally get over here, the Meteor Guard and the Guards of Khazad-dûm can show these men of the West how it's really done. I wonder if we'll... Well, actually, no, we probably won't. I was just musing on the upcoming Lord of the Rings show and what its contents will be, but the Fall of Numenor. It'd be interesting to see if the show stretches into the breaking up of Arnor and the three realms of Arthedain, Cardland and Rudara, and the rise of Angmar as well. I think that would be interesting. There are stories to be told there. I don't really hold out too much faith that the Netflix show is going to be... Or is it Amazon? I can't remember. One of the two. I don't really hold out too much faith that it's going to be that good, to be honest with you. I just sort of brace myself for disappointment no matter what, but still. Before they have a chance to ruin it, it's fun to speculate. Still 3 Tharbad Warhammers alive, which is impressive. They've been in melee for quite some time against pretty stiff opposition, and they're still just about standing. Cardland's army, to be honest with you, has mostly ground themselves into the dirt. Cardland are pretty much dead, actually. So, I mean, they've definitely died en masse for the cause. Mirkwood have pretty much gone as well, but with their unorthodox army, that's not too surprising. Linden, of course, fell by the wayside to Erebor, so Khazad-dûm, as well as a dozen or so men from Cardland, are going to be the only ones left standing here, so a very, very close fight indeed. A battle of high quality, which is good to see from newer players. Newer players, like, they get a bit of a bad rap, I think, and most of that comes down to the fact that most of the games I get sent are by people who, like, veterans of the game. And if there is a newer player in the lobby, they can be exposed a little bit, and it's a bit harsh on them to sort of denounce them for that. Whereas here, where there's a lobby with a lot of newer players, you can see here that they're able to learn and not be thoroughly trounced, which is good. But it still did come down to the most experienced player, I think, making the moves which ultimately ended up winning the game for the attackers. So well played to Froggy. Like, again, he got the least amount of kills, but it is my firm conviction that without him and without his savvy, maybe the defenders would have won this, because they got a lot of kills. Numenor got a lot of kills. I mean, Dorwinion got the least, but then that's to be expected. They had to deal with a very robust assault indeed. Cardland getting good kills. And I feel as though most of that comes down to the fact that when the assault began over here, they were able to line up their skirmishers and tee off into Numenor, which was another good move. Like, it's very self-explanatory for Merciful X to do that, but he still did it, and got a lot of kills there. Let's see what did the damage for Dorwinion. So we got Alvelin Marksman, not too surprising that they got a lot of kills. Some Nandor Bladeguard, that was probably the one in the late game, getting over 250 there against primarily Cardland armies. Cardland infantry, I should say. Be very impressive if they killed off multiple armies all by themselves. Keldon River Patrol, very mixed fortunes. One got battered by archers very quickly, the other one was able to loose several volleys into the Mirkwood line. But the Morroquendi Glade Lords, the cavalry, was the thing which dealt the most damage, because of course it wasn't killed off in the early game, and it was able to run around making a nuisance of itself, which a unit of knights, if left unchecked, can really run rampant quite quickly. The Glade Masters did okay for the limited amount of time they were in melee as well. The Hammer Guard, though, isolated as they were diffused very expertly by Khazad-dûm. So big thank you to Safi for sending this replay in. It was of very nice quality indeed, and it's good to see the Mountain Pass again, because we haven't seen that ever since 0.97 was released, so it's good to make a return to an old classic. As for the next battle I show, I'm not really sure yet. I'm still making up my mind on that one. It may very well be the Bur Sagath sort of pseudo scenario that I said it was going to be previously before a new map got sent into me, an all new map. So it probably will end up being that one. I'm not sure yet. We'll see. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.